Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we have another day of severe storms with large hail, damaging winds, and an isolated tornado threat as the heat will continue to build and some of the monsoonal rains will come back for the desert Southwest as we'll walk you through the next 7 to 10 days. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing out there? Hope everyone enjoyed my live stream coverage on all the storms that happened last night. We were online for about 4, 5, 6 hours last night, tracking all the storms that really kind of packed a punch and left some tornadoes and wind threats across the portions of the upper Midwest and the upper Great Lakes. But if you do like detailed weather breakdowns, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's take a look at the overall water vapor imagery this morning to kind of give you a true setup on what's really happening right now. We've got a steady stream of moisture with another powerful low pressure system going to be impacting the Pacific Northwest. That's going to be bringing kind of just daily rain showers for that region. But we see a powerful low up here by Winnipeg. That was actually the culprit that left all the snow, and even parts of Montana actually got up to 33 inches of snow with that powerful system, along with some of the flooding rains that left the devastating flash flooding around Yellowstone Park. But now this morning, that instability will continue to dive, and along that northern branch of the ridge, we've got a lot of lift in the atmosphere that's going to be dropping down and setting up for storms this morning across portions of, say, the DC area into New York, back into portions of Pennsylvania. That is just this morning's round, and we're gonna have a secondary round that's going to be on the severe side that I actually will be covering live on this channel about 3 o'clock. But we also have another hurricane out here. It's our second hurricane of the season out here in the Pacific. That's going to be moving away and going to be fizzling out. But we also have more instability around into the portions of the Western Caribbean that's leaving just really kind of daily rain showers for those portions around Central America. That's left a lot of flooding up there. But overall, we've got a lot of Saharan dust for a good chunk of the Atlantic as well as the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm not looking for like any type of tropical development impacting the United States really kind of anytime soon for the next week or two. So let's take a look at the overall storm reports from last night, because these are very preliminary. And right now we do have confirmed 2 tornado reports, but the National Weather Service will be adding to these as we were tracking these storms. I think we counted about 29 tornado warnings last night. So it was pretty active for a couple hours there for sure, with a lot of wind threats. And we also have that secondary pocket of all those wind threats that happen in the portions of the Southeast last night. But overall for today, man, we're going to be talking about a lot more heat going to be building across the country. We've got numerous heat advisories in place for a good chunk of Kansas and the Missouri, back into Kentucky, much of the Southeast. That it just extends into portions of Indiana as well as Ohio here. And then we also have a pocket of into southern Illinois where we have excessive heat warnings and watches in place in portions of Nebraska here, where they're going to be seeing some of those heat index values approaching that 110 dangerous degree temperature. So it's definitely serious with this heat really starting to build over a good chunk of the country. But for today, our main threat is going to be this secondary wave that's going to come across the Northeast that the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted. That enhanced risk for severe storms into portions of Pittsburgh, into St. College, back into Williamsport, into Binghamton, all the way up here into Watertown. Those areas are going to be the most susceptible to seeing those severe storms later in this afternoon. These will be more kind of isolated in nature, but they also will be fairly large hail producers. There will be damaging wind producers. And yes, you can't rule out an isolated tornado all the way down in that slight risk zone. And there's also a secondary pocket over Kansas City, back into Beatrice, back into Jacksonville, and into the St. Louis area. These also could be on the stronger side, and some of those could be also severe as well. So actually, we'll be covering this event live on this channel about 3 o'clock this afternoon. So definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, this is what the radar kind of looks like this morning around 8 o'clock when I'm doing this video. We've got that morning activity that's moving across the Northeast. coming back from Scranton, back from Allentown, back into Trenton, into the Philadelphia area. New York City is getting around to storms this morning, back into Bridgeport, into Waterbury. And that will continue to dive off and go out in the open waters and more or less fizzle out. But then that secondary system will come back from the northeast, and we'll be seeing these little popcorn isolated activity, and those where you see those deepening purples and especially those white shaded areas, those could be turning severe and bringing some of that large hail and that damaging wind. And yes, you can't roll out an isolated spent up tornado and this area for today. But yeah, let's take a look at the overall tornado parameter index, and it's not like really significant, but it's not zero, right? I mean, we could be looking at, you know, maybe possibly 1 or 2 spent up tornadoes. You definitely can't leave your guard down on days like this, because the atmosphere is, yes, it is rotating. So we're gonna. That's why we're gonna be covering this event live about 3 o'clock this afternoon, Central Daylight Time. But as we go into the tornado thread, you can definitely see where they do have about a 5% chance, and that's where they have that enhanced risk from essentially Pittsburgh all the way up into Watertown. Those areas are going to see the highest probability of seeing those little quick spent up tornadoes. But if you're in the 2% back from Kansas City into St. Louis and all the way down south into DC into Richmond and back into Roanoke, you can't leave your guard down, because you're still under the gun to seeing a possible quick spin up later on this afternoon into the early evening time frame. But as we transition tomorrow, I think the severe threat does come down a little bit, but there are actually indications, even though we do have a marginal risk now, that back into the Virginia, back into the Carolinas, this actually could be bumped up to at least a slight risk for tomorrow, as these storms will continue to dive around that ridge and really start to amplify and intense again, I think, along the eastern seaboard. So we can look at that on the overall predicted winds over the next 48 hours. And we got that pocket that's coming through today across the portions of the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. But we also have that secondary wind threat that could be increasing that severe threat over portions of Virginia, back into the Carolinas, back into South Carolina, into Georgia tomorrow, with some of these higher wind gusts. And some of these indications are peaking out, 60, 70, maybe even upwards to 80 miles an hour. And some of these isolated pockets of these storms going to be impacting probably for some time tomorrow. So I do feel the Storm Prediction Center will be kind of upgrading that area as we get closer to that event. But as we transition into Saturday, I really do feel a lot of the severe threat really starts to take a breather. It's been a really active week, so it really starts to take a breather. We actually have some kind of southwest winds off the Gulf of Mexico, and hey, it's not out of the question. This is just garden variety thunderstorms, but these are pop-ups in nature and not very high probabilities. You're talking 10 or 20% here, but a lot of these areas really hasn't actually seen any rainfall in the last 2 weeks. So if you live in Dallas, if you live in Austin, if you live in, say, in West Texas, I mean, you can't rule it out that you could be looking at a little pop-up shower, pop-up thunderstorm in the daytime heating of the atmosphere as we get into your Saturday afternoon. But overall, a good chunk of the country will be kind of on resetting. And for your Father's Day weekend, as we get into your Father's Day, here's what it looks like for over the country, as this ridge of high pressure will be actually shifting back over the central U.S. and really starting to expand. So actually those triple digits and those record high temperatures really kind of move further north into Kansas, back into Nebraska. We're talking 104s, 105s in places. Even South Dakota over 100 degrees, North Dakota even over 100 degrees. The cooler spots in town are essentially going to be in the mid-Atlantic states, as well as up here into portions of the Northeast, especially into Maine, with highs in the 60s. And the same thing on the opposite perspective in the end of the Pacific Northwest, where they, this time last year, they were dealing with all that record heat just come almost like historic heat, and that's almost been just completely the opposite this year, with just much cooler conditions up there, and I don't really see that changing for a while now. For the next at least 2 to 3 weeks, I'd still feel much of the Pacific Northwest is going to be on the cooler side. But as far as your precipitation goes for Father's Day on Sunday, yeah, for most of the country, it's kind of high and dry. That's going to be dominating over that ridge of high pressure. So if you want to cook out on the grill with dad, and you got plenty of sun to contend with it. But yes, the monsoonal rains do come back for portions of the desert Southwest, especially New Mexico, getting into portions of Arizona, Utah, and as well as Colorado here. But there's also another pocket again where along that steady stream of moisture on that Pacific jet, where you do have that lift, we could be looking at more rain showers into portions of Idaho and actually into Montana, where technically they don't need the rain because they've been dealing with all the flooding up there with this combination of all the snow melt and all the rain that's going to be impacting that area. It's not a good combination with all that flooding happening. But as we extend to next week and go to the actual official start of summer, this is June 21st now, and this kind of gives you an idea where the rise of high pressure is, and some of where the darker the reds, especially over Texas and much of the southeast. That just kind of shows you the higher temperature anomalies for there. So a good chunk of much of the southern plains and the southeast is going to be parked under that ridge of high pressure, where the jet stream lifts well to the north. And we always have to look again for any kind of buckles in the atmosphere, where any kinks in the hose, if you will, and see, along this ridge on the northern branch where storms will fire. And I think we're going to have another setup, as we get into, say, the first official day of summer, where we have that, that these ridge rider takes effects, where we have some of these kinks in the hose, where we could be looking at more storms, popping up with that, along with that 100-degree heat that building in. We could be looking at more storms coming back for parts of the Dakotas, back into Minnesota, and they'll just come around this ridge, dump over parts of Canada, and come back into portions of the Northeast with more severe storms, probably for your official day of a summer. But overall, for the next 7 days, I'm just kind of showing you some of the precipitation anomalies and where some of the higher rains could be falling. And yes, the monsoonal flow will come back. I think it definitely starts this weekend and will continue for much of next week with these kind of daily rain showers for parts of the desert Southwest. We'll have the continual flow of the Pacific moisture, but overall for the next 7 days, a lot of this area under the dominating ridge will see a below average precipitation anomalies, and much of the ridge will be lifting well to the north, and the above average rains will actually shift all the way into Canada. And then as they come around that ridge and dive down around into the northeast, we could be looking at above average rains impacting portions of New York as well as Pennsylvania. But beyond that, going into even the following week, I think the ridge just even expands. It even expands even more, and it shifts further off into the southern plains. Now we just have a really, really dominating ridge over a good chunk of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, into Oklahoma, into Kansas. I know people are asking me, when's it going to rain again in Oklahoma? It might be a while. It might be a while before it rains. With this, it's hard to break down this ridge once this gets locked in place. And I think next week it just really just expands and just amplifies even more over that part of the country. But overall, for the next 10 days, your temperature anomalies looks like this, with, yes, the highest probability of seeing your most heat and your highest above average temperatures are Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, into Nebraska, for a good chunk of the southeast, as the ridge will amplify and build all the way to Canada. And again, the only cooler spots in town are going to be predominantly the mid-Atlantic and a good chunk of the Northeast, as well as the opposite into the Pacific Northwest, where they were just seeing the opposite this time last year. But again, overall, between the precipitation anomalies, between now and, say, the end of the month, but so we still see those above average rains continuing for the desert Southwest. Well, I feel like once the monsoonal flow starts, I think it's going to be you know, ongoing. So adding up some of those totals, so you're going to be creeping away, you know, taking a dent in some of the drought that's unfolded over the last 4 to 6 months into the desert Southwest, as the monsoonal flow will be on a continuing basis for that region. But overall, where that dominating ridge will be in place, you got a lot of sinking air, you got a lot of substances, and you're gonna have below average precipitation anomalies. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely stay tuned to the live stream today about 3 o'clock to cover those storms in the Northeast, and catch me in the next video where I protect you before and after.